I want to welcome in Sam Mellinger of the Kansas City Star, who's had a couple interesting tidbits on Big 12 expansion over the last week. So, Sam, thanks for joining.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So, one thing that caught my eye in an article you wrote earlier, may have been this week, you had quoted an executive, TV executive, commenting about the Northeast market and how valuable that was. Can you go into some details on that and how that applies to UConn?
Yeah, so it was a conversation that swayed me. I kind of thought that UConn to the Big 12 didn't make sense. You know what I mean? Just geographically and, for some other reasons. But his point is basically it opens up a new market. And not just, I feel like the storyline when Rutgers went to the Big 10 was, kind of overdone about TV ratings and stuff. And his point wasn't that as much as just like exposure for the league. And, that's a good part of the country to have a lot of exposure in. A lot of people live in that part of the country. It's a good part of the country to, just open up a new recruiting ground, and that kind of thing. And, he just convinced me that TV would enjoy UConn being in that league. And once I started thinking about that, I mean, all this stuff is basically done for TV, right? So, if he's right about that, and look, this is just one guy, but if he's right about that, then I started to think about UConn a lot seriously after that. And I should point out too, I ran UConn by some administrators within the Big 12, and it's mixed. I mean, everybody's mixed, right? Like, there's nobody that has unanimous support, but there's some administrators that love exactly what this TV executive is talking about, and there's some who think, I do not want to ask the volleyball team at Baylor to take a weekend trip to, Storrs, Connecticut and miss class on a Tuesday or whatever. So, I mean, there's logistical issues too, but, the UConn would bring, a specific strength to the Big 12.
Interesting that you brought up talking to some school administrators. Can you say whether those were some of the power brokers within the conference or some of the other ones maybe closer to where you're located?
Yeah, it was a mix. The one in particular that I talked to from, you say a power broker school was more interested in the exposure. And, I guess that makes sense. We all look out for our self-interest, right? And, the ones closer to where I'm located in Kansas City, you probably figured that out.
Yep.
I'm more like, this would be logistically, I don't know if it's worth it.
Okay. In your eyes, if there is no Big 12 network on the horizon, do you see TV really playing that big of a part, or do you think it's more an exposure point, as you just mentioned?
No, I do. Yeah, I mean, so there's a point that that John Curry, who's the AD at K-State, not that he's one of the the guys pulling the levers with the Big 12, but he makes a point that not having a league in some ways has benefited. Not having a league, not having a network in some ways has benefited K-State. And his point is that schools like K-State are getting more exposure without a league network than they would with a league network. Because with a league network, you're, in the Big 12, we're talking about like K-State, Iowa State, KU, Texas Tech when they're down. Schools like that are just going to kind of be buried, with on this Big 12 network that not a lot of people are going to get. And you can see the same thing with the Big 10 and the SEC, the schools that their games are televised on those networks that not everybody gets. While, Alabama, LSU, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State are playing on, the ABC, ESPN, CBS. So, I get that point too. And, just if there's not a network, that doesn't mean, if there's not a Big 12 network, that doesn't mean that TV money is not going to influence the decision, because then what you're focused on is whatever that next deal is going to be, whether it's with, Fox or ESPN or whatever.
Now, coming from somebody in the heart of the country, you might have a different view of UConn than the folks up this way in terms of the academics that UConn brings, the overall athletic department, and the market value. What's the perception of the UConn program and UConn as a whole out your way?
I think people respect it. I should say I don't know anything about the academics. I don't know if the academics are great. I don't know if they're terrible. I don't know their reputation. I haven't asked enough about that to know what the perception here would be of that. But I think people obviously respect the basketball program. And I think the football program is seen as, certainly better than it used to be. And, one thing that I think UConn would have to do, and I assume the people at that school recognize this or are okay with it, is they'd have to expand the football stadium. They'd have to get a little bit bigger there. But, I think, so part of the thing is, like, when, people around here are thinking about schools to invite to the Big 12, after a while, like, honestly, they're all kind of the same. They all have strengths. They all have, like, weaknesses. It's all, pretty much non-Power 5 schools. So there's, some inherent risk there. So it's hard to differentiate, like, between, UConn has, like, a good part of the country to get into, right? Like, well, so does UCF, and UCF wants in. There's a lot of people that live in that part of the country. That's great. Well, Houston wants in, and Houston is the second or third or fourth biggest city in the country. So it's hard for me to kind of draw that line between Cincinnati and Memphis and UTF and Tulane, although that's kind of easier because I don't think much of Tulane. Houston, UConn, BYU, which could potentially just be a football only. And that's just not me. That's not just me, the sports writer in Kansas City saying that. Like, if you talk to an AD, or an administrator type at KU or K-State, talk to, administrator type at Oklahoma, talk to the administrator type at, Texas, like, all these people have very different views too. And they're not even, like, specific to, the school's own self-interest. It's just, reasonable minds can look at all of these schools that I've mentioned and have a completely different ranking, 1 through 8 or whatever it is.
Yeah, right. On the comment on UConn would have to expand the stadium, the 40,000 seat stadium here in Connecticut was actually built in order to easily expand by 10 to 15,000. Even in an off season, they could even put up another level. So that's probably a good thing. But in terms of the latest news you're hearing, timeline wise, as well as what size would the future Big 12 look like? Are they looking at really 2 or 4 teams, as what seems to be the consensus I've heard?
All right, so first of all, let me tell you, and especially if you're gonna be involved in the Big 12 and follow this league more, like, what they say today is like only sometimes related to what they say tomorrow or the next day or the next week, and this expansion thing is like highlighting that point with just the brightest light possible, because the whole summer they've been let's slow play this, let's gather resumes, if you will, of all these schools. And once that hit, it was just last week, I think, right? Yep. Once that hit, like, there seemed to be, and that was during the Big 12 media days, and as soon as that hit, Bob Bowlesby and Dave Bourne, who's the president of Oklahoma, and in a lot of ways is a lot more powerful than Bob Bowlesby. But those guys, like, said completely different things than they had in the past. And so I think that's the most tangible. Again, the Big 12 could completely flip back and say, we're cool with 10. Let's hold on. But that was the most tangible, kind of about face that I've seen from them in a while.
Now I'm talking with Sam Mellinger of the Kansas City Star on Big 12 expansion. Talking about the two big dogs, so to speak, within the conference, Texas and Oklahoma. In your eyes and around the conference, how committed do you believe they truly are to the long-term health of the conference?
This is another thing that you would get 100 different answers from if you asked 100 people. So the question, how committed are they to the long-term health of the Big 12?
And the long-term, their long-term commitment to staying within the Big 12.
Yeah, so I think they're just like any other school, that they are committed to the Big 12 as long as it is in their own best interest. And I think Texas and Oklahoma get painted as being selfish a lot of times because of that. But the same thing is true of Iowa State, KU, K-State, all the so-called smaller schools. It's just that they have different self-interests. Like they're coming from a different place. To me, I don't know that they're like happily committed to the Big 12, but I think they are committed, and some of that is in that grant of rights that I think has about 7 years, 8 years, something like that. So just financially they're tied to it. But I also think that, and I wish I would have written this. Like this guy, really smart person, and he said it, and it's just for some reason I didn't write it, and I should have. But when the last round was going on, and people were, Dave Bourne said his wallflower comment. People thought Oklahoma was gone, and Texas was flirting, I think, with the Pac, whatever it was at that time, the Pac-10 or Pac-12. And his point was Texas's selfishness will keep the Big 12 together. And I should have written, I was like kicking myself because it was such a smart point that he made, and it ended up being true that, Texas, I don't know if you want to say came back to the Big 12, but remained in the Big 12 because no other league would give them what the Big 12 has given them. Have your own network and take the bulk of the money and, do all these things that kind of run the league, and then nobody else is going to let them do that. So as long as that's true, if Texas wants to go to the Pac-12, they're not going to be able to have that same sort of, power. It's not going to be, they're not going to be able to call the shots in the same way that they are in the Big 12. So I think in that way, it just makes sense for them to stay. I mean, I guess if I was going to guess that one of those two schools would leave, my guess is that it would be Oklahoma, because I think there's a little bit of a little brother thing going on there, and they'd like to, kind of stick it to Texas on the way out the door. But, politically, there's a whole mess of issues with that, too, that it is said, I don't know how true this is, but it is said by people who know what they're talking about that, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State are tied together. Mm-hmm. So if you take Oklahoma, you have to take Oklahoma State. Not that Oklahoma State is, dead weight or anything. They have Boone Pickens and a lot of money and a good football program and all that. But, there's just, politically, it's kind of a mess, is what I'm saying. So, it seems like, in 2026, in 10 years, I would bet on Texas and Oklahoma being in the Big 12, but certainly it wouldn't surprise me if they weren't.
That's an interesting take. Final question for Sam Mellinger. In your eyes, if the Big 12 was going to continue down the path and they do expand as all indications look like, what do you think the future of the conference looks like? What teams do you think would be added if they do expand by 2 or 4?
Yeah, I mean, so like everybody else in and around the league, I'll give you an answer on Wednesday, and if you called me back on Friday, I might have a different answer. But to me, it makes the most sense if they were willing to do this on both sides. It would make the most sense to fill one of those spots with BYU as a football-only member, and that way you alleviate the no Sundays rule that BYU has, and you also don't make the softball team, travel to Morgantown, West Virginia for games, stuff like that. So that would make sense. That there's a lot to like about BYU. It's a national program. Their attendance is good. All that stuff. There's a lot to like. And then the rest of it, like I said, I was swayed by the TV executive telling me about UConn, so that's where I would go right now. But I think, if I talk to somebody in the South, they might convince me on UCF, Yeah. And if, I talk to somebody in Texas, they might convince me on Houston. Houston, I think, just objectively might be the strongest candidate because it doesn't have, sort of the baggage of BYU. And it's in a major metro. The football program is obviously competitive. They have a lot of very wealthy and very motivated, ambitious, generous donors. Which always helps. So subjectively they're the best, but objectively I think they're the best. But I also kind of think really another team in Houston, or another team in Texas. Is that really what the Big 12 needs? I feel like they've kind of got Texas. I know Texas A&M went to the SEC, but they've got the most popular school in that state, and I wonder if that's a little bit redundant. And I say that because I think most people would tell you Houston. So I'm telling you why I'm not saying Houston. But Cincinnati is interesting. Memphis, I hear some administrators are down on Memphis's academics, among other things. I don't know if that's how realistic that is. Tulane, maybe I need to ask more questions, but I have a hard time taking Tulane,
Yeah.
As seriously as some of the other schools.
All right, Sam, I appreciate the feedback on the Big 12. Before we go, give the listeners where they can find you, and maybe some of the other work you do.
Yeah, sure. Twitter's probably the easiest way, right? It's just my last name, @Mellinger, Mellinger. I'm also on Facebook. But yeah, just cover sports of all kinds here in Kansas City, whatever's interesting to people around here. And usually that's Royals, Chiefs, and colleges for the most part.
All right, Sam, definitely appreciate it. You do have a couple good ones from UConn football with the Chiefs in terms of Anthony Sherman, Kashif Moore at wide receiver this year. So I think you'll find them interesting to talk to, and hopefully they contribute on the field. Definitely appreciate the time, and maybe we'll touch base down the line should expansion news heat up.
Yeah, man, have fun with the circus.